Everyone, welcome to LGBTr. That stands for lots of good books to read. And right now I am with a great new guest. I almost said his name before I actually did my intro, so I got to catch myself there. But yeah, so let me just jump into it. Tonight's guest has been published in 95 Notes Literary Magazine for Poetry and Sage Publishing's Encyclopedia of Identity for an article. Despite these credits, he still considers himself a writer of fiction. He has a master's in creative writing from Chicago State University and began Rainbow Room Publishing, under which he released his first miniseries, Love Something Infinite and Love from Behind. He's set to conclude the miniseries with his latest book, Love Changes. What's it all about? And what more can we learn about this entrepreneur? Everyone, I introduce you to Eddie S. Pierce Jr. Hey, Eddie, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, now we knew each other for a while now. I think we met on Facebook, right? I mean, it's
Yes,
been
at least 2016, because I remember you didn't have any dreads. So,
right. So yeah, things are changing, but yeah, we've known each other for a little bit now, and it's great to finally actually talk with you face to face. It's always been through text or something.
right.
So, all right. So, on a couple of occasions, you describe yourself as SGL or same gender loving. Why make that distinction as opposed to one of the more common labels such as gay or bi?
Well, I want to throw out the first disclaimer that I am not a big fan of labels at all, but I do appreciate the ability and that empowering effect when you name yourself. When it comes to the term gay, to be quite honest, I do still use it. It just depends on when I'm writing, you know, how that kind of more academic voice might slip in and out. But as far as using the incorporating the term same gender loving into, you know, my lexicon or what have you, in my personal description, it just seems like a more, in my opinion, being very stuck on semantics, it seems like a more specific definition, especially when you think about the idea of the word gay meaning happy as well as. And so, you know, you also look at the history, the unfortunate history of a lot of homophobic baggage that is related to the term gay. Gay is often, unfortunately, in my opinion, incorrectly used to speak to, it's trying to cover that whole LGBTQ spectrum. And I don't think that that is right. That kind of casts a shadow over lesbian, over bisexual, over transgender. But when it comes to SGL, I've actually just done some little research on it myself, and I had to confirm some things. But it gave the impression that the term was more Afrocentric, and that the idea was that it was speaking specifically to being a gay man of color. But at any rate, I loudly, proudly proclaim myself to be a black, gay, SGL, homosexual man. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was always a little bit confused because I had never heard of that until kind of coming into my own within the Black gay community, and I heard this other term that people were using. I'm just like, okay, so what was that really about? And so yeah, I mean, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for some other people who may not necessarily know. And I thank you for so eloquently explaining your
Thank
your
you.
definition or your reason for using it. So let me move on to something that you wrote in your bio. You describe yourself as a young, urban, African American male raised with traditional Christian values, diagnosed with clinical depression, who happens to be gay and HIV positive. All of these served as factors for you to begin writing, but were you always writing, or was there a specific event that spurred on your artistic outlet?
Okay. So, well, honestly, the writing began, oh gosh, let my parents tell it and my grandparents tell it. I might have been 6 or 7. It was purely out of watching cartoons, reading comic books, even reading folklore and mythology from, you know, Child Craft Encyclopedia set. There was also even being very invested in Bible stories growing up in the church. But in a lot of instances, it was the fact that I didn't like the way the story ended, or I wanted the story to go longer, or I wanted to change the character. So I was basically at that age not even knowing that, that was modeling after another author. That's what I kind of got into. And so as far as the professional writing career goes, that's been more like 8 years or so, looking at the credits for the publishing with 95 Notes for Poetry, looking at Sage Encyclopedia for the article on the phenomenon of passing. And even now, honestly, I'm just starting to see how much was invested in me at that age of 6, 7, or 8, how much belief there was in other people, and to the point that even those binders of stories that I wrote at that age, my grandmother always said, keep those stories, they're going to make us rich someday. And in recent months, I was telling a friend of mine, oh, I don't think I'll ever write children's literature. I'll never write young adult literature. And as I, ascribe everything to God, God, was like, go look in this trunk in the garage. You still have all those stories from when you were a child. And now I have a plan for children's literature and young adult literature. So I've been at it for a very, very long time in the sense of just writing to be writing.
Okay, very cool. So how did any of those other factors that you listed, how did that push you further, or how does that how you write about?
Well, basically, there were a number of circumstances, especially as an adult, that brought about the idea of attempting to publish professionally. One of the things I had to probably say the most was that the story that generated the first book, it was actually something that I wrote on an airplane on my way to an interview, not even ironically, but on my way to Las Vegas, where the story takes place, and didn't get the job, came back, but it was only maybe 20 pages. Somewhere in there, I decided to apply to Chicago State University's Masters of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program, and that required 40 pages of fiction. So I said, oh, just add 20 more pages. And then, of course, you find out you have a thesis, which is a creative thesis, which is a novel that needs 100, 120 pages. Okay, well, we can write, those. And when I got done, and by the time, you've reread a thesis over and over again, or anything else that you've reread, you really kind of get at the core of what it is you've done. And I noticed how much it personally healed me in a lot of respects. And so it was just in my head, well, who else might this heal? Who else might this touch? And so that turned into the idea, okay, now we have to publish this. Initially, it was the attempt to go the traditional publishing route. And honestly, through my different classes, even in undergrad, I knew that the publishing world was already shrinking. And I'm talking circa 1996. So when I got started here, this was 2011. And so it was just very, very prevalent that you're going to probably have to do this, as I often say, Jay-Z style. Go at your own, sell the books out your trunk until you get enough people's attention and, keep moving from there. So, yeah, so it was a number of different things that brought about the initial story, and then the story itself, much like, as a writer, it just takes on a life of its own. And the more that it grew, it also, the functions that it served also grew.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Now in your bio, you mentioned authors like Elin Harris, James Earl Hardy, and James Baldwin taught you to, quote, not only hear the voices of the marginalized, the underserved, and underrepresented, but to also see the commonalities between their stories and that. You go on to say that your first book, Something Infinite, quote, seeks to reconcile the two. So, how does that story reconcile the two?
Well, honestly, in a very general sense, all of my writing, at least what I've been doing as far as the series is concerned, has been very, very focused on being aware that I'm speaking from a very, very specific vantage point. Going back to all of the quote unquote labels, black, gay, Christian, male, what have you. But I was very, very, very invested in the emotions. I knew that I had a quote unquote target audience as far as a demographic was concerned, but I also knew on that business side that you have to go mainstream, you have to cross over. And even as an artist, and I know several artists have said this. Actually, I think Lena White, the producer of The Shy. And I want to say that I've heard Issa Rae echo the same sentiment that while we are Black people, while we may be gay, straight, lesbian people writing stories, we're trying to reach the masses. We're trying to tell human stories. So to that end, I've been focusing more on the emotions. That's why that love is so big. We all know about love. We've all know about having it, losing it, chasing it. We know about loss. We know about rejection, the fear of rejection. We know about triumph. Regardless of what vantage point you're looking into this story from, you can recognize those emotions. And that's honestly been confirmed for me by so many people that would be identified as straight or heterosexual reading the book and saying, I never saw this, that, or the other, but I totally felt, what your character was experiencing. So that's why I'm trying to reconcile the two by putting us all on a common ground and presenting a human story, not just a black gay story.
Understood. Okay. Now it's clear that part of your mission is to acknowledge a slice of the community that is often forgotten in fiction with HIV positive characters. Meaning is that whenever they're used, it's to make a statement about HIV. And personally, I can't think of any HIV positive characters that were just human first.
Mm.
So, how do you approach this in your work?
Well, honestly, you could kind of say that I cheated. Well, obviously, as writers, we write what we know, and I've already explained the process of how the book came about. And so it honestly was something that I never thought anybody else would read. I never thought that I would share it at that time. I was honestly still very, very quote unquote closeted about my sexuality. And then when HIV comes part of the mix, it was like coming out all over again, as many of my friends have said. But basically what happened was that I borrowed so much from my own life and then put a lot of, poetic sprinkles of poetic license on it. And it, just naturally came out that that was something that I needed to talk about in that story. I have to give, credit to my teachers at Chicago State, Dr. Kelly Norman Ellis, especially, that often told us that the thing that you're scared to write about is the thing that you probably need to write about. It doesn't mean that you're going to share it, but as I did that, and as I mentioned beforehand, I saw where the process of that introspection and that writing healed me. I just honestly, just on the simplest terms, saw that someone, would be able to relate to this and someone would be blessed, by seeing that they're not the only one dealing with this. Another thing that I wanted to do with it was to put a face to HIV. It's very easy for us to think about letters and to think about statistics and think about people that we never see, never touch, never come in contact with. But when you put a face to it, and honestly, the way that I even came to my family and explained everything to them, by the time they knew anything, it had been maybe 6 months after the fact because I had a great support system in my partner at the time. But I pretty much came to them and I showed them, 6 months. You've been watching me for 6 months. I've been bouncing around here. I've been dancing around here. I've been doing everything that you've ever seen me do. It has not altered the trajectory of my life in a negative way. If anything, it added to, what I was able to write about. I've said it on several occasions that, the homophobia, the fear of HIV, a quote unquote ugly truth became a beautiful piece of art that ideally is helping and healing other people. So, like I said, the idea was more so that, let's personify this to a degree. Let's attach it to a face that you might know that looks similar to a face that you might have seen. And now we're going to open the doors to these conversations.
Very interesting. I think that's a very positive uh, message that you're kind of putting out there for a lot of people, and I think that's very good. So, what got you to the point where you left the 9 to 5 world, and how can others follow suit?
Well, that's definitely one of those things that is very, very subjective. And honestly, to be quite honest, I left the 9 to 5 world maybe 3 times over. The initial time would have been, I believe, 2013. But basically, at that time, it was very much about soul searching. It was very much about where I was in life. There were a number of circumstances that just kind of brought everything to a head, and just made me really, really realize, what it was I really wanted to do, how I wasn't fulfilled entirely with what I was doing. And honestly, I had to examine a number of things in my life, my place of worship, my current relationship, my 9 to 5, my online teaching gig. And just being, one day I remember just being so tired, just exhausted, just frustrated. And the moment that I just spoke that out in the house to myself, I mean, I shouted it out. I was loud. I mean, just upset. I hate this kind of thing. And I remember saying something to the effect of, I'm not going to work this hard for anybody else again in my life. This is it. I'm done. I didn't know what that even meant. I didn't know where that would go. But I honestly felt that all of creation kind of turned its attention to me in that moment and said, oh my God, he's finally ready. Somebody can turn the pressure off on him now so that he can process, what he's finally got, in his head about, pursuing the writing. So, that for me, I would say that, that's for everyone to kind of really, really get along with themselves, to really, really, do the different steps and the different things that everybody's kind of advertising to find your purpose, to find your calling, to find that craft, that thing that you would do even if you don't get paid for it, that thing that you'll do that keeps you up from 6 o'clock a.m. one morning to 7 or 10 o'clock the next morning. If you love it, if you're operating from a place of joy, that's where you're supposed to be, in my opinion. Now, as far as the practical matters are concerned, I myself left that 9 to 5 situation with the meager, minor amount of a retirement account. It definitely was not a year's worth salary. It wasn't even 3 months of a salary, to be quite honest. But I know that somewhere unconsciously, I knew that I still had the support of my parents. I still had the support of my family, my friends. Even by that time, my partner and I at the time had broken up, but he was still willing to say, "Hey, I would still cover this, that, and the other. Go ahead and pursue your dream." So I would definitely say to look at both pieces, look at that emotional, spiritual component of finding your craft, finding what it is you love and your purpose, what have you. But where you can, definitely where you can, put those ducks, those dollars, those coins, as the kids call them, in order. It'd be so much easier. I mean, so many good things, honestly, was born out of that experience, including the third book that comes behind all of this. But I just would highly recommend that, yeah, look at the financial piece and try to get that in order well in advance.
Awesome. You created Rainbow Room Publishing LLC as a way to publish your own books with the desire to publish other authors' works as well. But in an interview with Soul.lgbt, you also mentioned a subsidiary company for other works. So, what other forms of art do you hope to represent?
Honestly, just like the rainbow implies, I'm looking to be as diverse as possible, have as big of a tent, quote unquote, as possible, be a vehicle for as many dreams as possible. But I just came to the conclusion that, when it came to even, and I'm honestly 7 years into it now, just not getting into the position to publish someone else. But I knew already that it's going to be impossible for me to publish every person's story that I come across, every good book, every collection of poetry, every photo book. It was just not going to happen. And so somewhere in there, I was inspired to, develop an online a web-based print on demand art magazine in which we will cover that full spectrum. We're talking about music, we're talking about visual arts, we're talking about performing arts. I'm going to be very liberal with this. I'm looking at tattoo artists, I'm looking at culinary artists, I'm looking at cosmetology, as outside of the box as we can kind of get. That vehicle for me, while it would be presenting works which would be, I guess you would say, much more brief in comparison to a novel, but it would allow me to get that many more people's stories on a platform, ideally a platform that I've made pretty big on my own, through my own works, and maybe get them that publishing credit that I can't give them, maybe get them that record deal that I could never get them, kind of thing. So it's very much about exposure, for every artist as much as possible.
Awesome. Okay. So, what can you tell us about the Love miniseries?
So the mini series, honestly, the way everything has gone, I had no ideas beyond this book, the first book. And there, basically, what just kept happening was that they would read the readers would read the books, and they would just adamantly ask me, "Well, what about this character? And what about that character? Well, that character says something that I need to know what he really was on, kind of thing." And so that's actually how the second book comes about. And so, there was just only that much more of that now that I had two books and a few more characters. So the Love Changes book basically is a collection of four short stories, featuring three quote unquote secondary characters. For anybody that's reading the series, you're looking at Calvin, the first boyfriend, you're looking at Rodney, the current partner, and then you're looking at the sorority sister slash sister girlfriend, Cherie, all in relation to the central character of the whole series, Saran Wright Jr. I had to think about the names. But so basically, it was an opportunity to answer a number of questions for a number of the readers. It was honestly an opportunity for me to play with perspective. I'm very, very big into seeing things from another angle. I to the even example of if I drive down the street during the day, there's a part of me that wants to see it at night. That's just kind of how I'm built. So what's happening is that you're seeing short snapshots, overlaying snapshots of these secondary characters' perspectives on a number of events that happened in the previous two books, but then you go away from the shared encounters with Saran, the central character, the narrator, and you see what their lives are all about. And so you get all of those stories, and those stories kind of are an interlude. And this book actually is sort of an interlude for the coming book, ideally 2019, 2020, Love After Sex. That will actually be the conclusion of the entire series. And basically, this mini series is kind of getting everybody in position to then be reintroduced as one big cast instead of it being just one central character, being one big cast and switching of perspectives as we wrap the whole thing up.
All right, very interesting. Very interesting. Now you started out saying that you kind of had people asking you about some of these characters after the first book. Now I'm kind of in the same position with my own, and I'm just curious, how hard was it for you to expand that story without having necessarily a whole series in mind when you started?
Well, honestly, I there was still, even though you know, and I'm sure you can relate to this, where it's very tempting to do what the fans want, with no regard for the art, no regard for anything else. I was kind of forced to keep it limited for a number of reasons. One of them being that I was being very ambitious with this story, very, very ambitious with this story. Anybody that reads a series or a canon of literature, you're very, very conscious of inconsistencies. So a story has been established here, and in order for me to bring these other characters in, bring their perspectives in, I had to be so close and so careful to tie all of the knots together and string them all together and, make sure even that, I remember even reading one of the edits where, somebody was driving a white truck in the book. And then in the new book, I put them in a red car. And I was like, oh no, you have to go back and change it. That's not what it was. So enough of that sort of thing honestly said, okay, you can only do so much of this. But honestly, too, one of the things that fueled it was because I was getting those questions, what about this character? What about that character? And it actually, honestly, as the author, and you can relate to this, piqued my own curiosity about the characters because they were only, as I mentioned to several people, they were only a plot device. They were supposed to get this little chocolate brother in the middle from book point from one cover of the book to the other cover of the book. I really didn't think much beyond that. But the more that character readers asked, and the more I looked at it myself, I said, well, I do want to see why Calvin, did what he did, why Rodney was made the way he was made, why Cherie, kind of had a bit of a cold shoulder, kind of thing. So the more I got curious about it, the more the writing came out, and honestly, it just kind of round out with a perfect number of three short stories about the new characters, and because everyone loves the central character, bringing him back into the story, and four was just enough. So
Got you, got you. So we heard that a lot of people loved the characters, but how did they feel about the story overall? What were their reactions?
well, man, it's been so gratifying in a lot of respects. And ironically, the reviews and the very professional, this is what we thought of the book kind of situations, the interviews, the reviews, those more so always came from the quote unquote gay community, people that were part of the media and things like that. But probably the most impactful, opinions and feedback from the readers actually came from the quote unquote straight audience. I had a pastor who told me, thank God I read this book because I had no idea what it felt like for a gay person to be sitting right in the church, And I mean, she wasn't, on anything, she hadn't said anything homophobic. I totally felt accepted and everything, but it was just a perspective that she didn't have, and then a cousin of mine, she mentioned how when she read about, Saran and dealing with HIV, it took her right back to a dear friend of hers who passed away some years ago, and it gave her so much insight into, what he might have been dealing with, how strong he had to be to even go through what he went through as long as he did. So, it's just been so much. And, you can probably imagine that, the books are on Amazon. There's feedback to be given on Amazon. But if you're not kind of really watching that and you don't really have the alerts set for that, you miss some things. So I think it was last fall that I saw a review of both books that goes all the way back to 2013. And it was something I really needed to see that day because I was in a sunken place. That's the only way to put it. But he went into, I had the impression that it was a gay brother of color, but he went into everything about how, I think, if I remember correctly, this book, basically got him into the idea of, I have to be more aware of bringing down walls and allowing people to love me, to let love in. That's something that Saran deals a lot with. In the case of this one, he said something to the effect that the relationship between the central character and his then love interest really echoed a similar relationship that he had, and it kind of promoted the idea of him trying to figure out how to heal some things. So it's been very gratifying, across the board. Honestly, getting feedback from males, females, straight, gay, different ethnicities and everything. And, I mean, it's been good. We hope to see that those sales reflect that very soon.
All right. I'm hoping for you. So
Thank
for
you.
the release of this book, you're putting on a star-studded event and going on a book tour. So what can attendees to these events expect?
So, with respect to the book release, this will be my third one, and it has always previously been a thing. The first one actually started in my house. Granted, it was it was a co-op condominium, but we had about 100 people in the house. I mean, I have a very, very large family before you can get to calling church members and friends family. And so it turned to a family gathering in a sense. It was a celebration, it was a family gathering. And so with this third one, I had the occasion to look at the fact that there was still, obviously, I know now, some internalized homophobia. There was still some fear of rejection from some very important people in my life. And so this is an opportunity for me to open the doors to them, to let them in, for me to be vulnerable, for them to, see what's good, what's going on. So it's going to be the celebration of, the combination of all the hard work. You can relate to that. You know how much work goes into trying to push these books out. Is very much in a literary sense, like trying to have a baby. And then you have, the idea of bringing the family together. But the final component of it is that we are in the stages of working on what's going to be an arts festival here in Chicago. And can't go into too many details about it now, but some of the people that would be performing at that, musicians, visual artists, performing artists, they will be at the book release as a precursor to what to expect for the arts festival. Main thing I can say right now is think Chicago Renaissance, a la Harlem Renaissance. That's what we're going for. So it's going to be a lot there. But then with regards to the book tour basically, that's a number of events across the city of Chicago. And then it goes from there to a number of other cities, including Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now we're starting to look at Detroit, Michigan, St. Louis, Missouri, Kansas, Missouri, Dallas, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia. And it would be a mixture of public readings, book club discussions on the book with the author present, publishing seminars, seeing as how I'm going to be, doing that starting in the fall with other authors. So we're going to be doing a number of those things, including, a number of other informative and entertaining things. And I always bring prizes. So everybody comes away happy, everybody comes away having a great time. And they got to talk about a book that they couldn't talk to anybody else about because now there's a gathering. So buy the book and you've already built in your ticket to go to one of the book events.
Awesome. Sounds like a lot of fun. So let us know what's in the future for you.
Well, so as of now, there are so many outlines. Actually, the book that I mentioned, the conclusion of the series, Love After Sex, the outline is just totally complete. it happened maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and I had no plans. I was sitting there waiting in the car for my father to come out of an office building, and I knew a few things I wanted to happen with that story, or I can't even say wanted to happen, just had to happen because of the trajectory of the characters. But we already know that that's happening, and the outline for that is already done. But then I can honestly say there are at least 5 projects of my own that are already mapped out either in the form of a draft or in the form a complete draft, mind you, and or an outline. But then aside from that, I have already a 3 book deal with a long-term friend and associate of mine, Crystal Renee Tillman, who's over at Dreamwriter Inc., a company that provides a number of different vital services in the sense of writing resumes on one end of the spectrum, but on the other end of the spectrum, being an editor, being a ghostwriter, and a writing coach. But she has 3 books. They're actually, the manuscripts are all, I think, beyond, as of today, they're like at least 90% done. And so she's going to have the quote unquote honor of being the first author outside of myself to come through Rainbow Room Publishing. And the deal actually is situated for us to have all 3 of those books done by the end of this year. So we have that, we have publishing seminars, we have the art magazine, we have the book tour, and one other thing I guess I didn't mention before now was that we now, after all these years, are pretty well situated to do a stage play based on the first book. It's something that we've been thinking about and mapping out since about 2014. And now the pieces, including the space to host it almost pretty much for free, is all falling into place. So talk about 7 years of this and 7 years being the year of completion. We're gonna get a lot done this year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm rooting for you. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, and it sounds amazing to have your book adapted into something different. I hope I can get to that point at some point.
You will get there, sir. I will help you. We will get there.
All right. Sounds good.
I
Sounds
want to
good.
see it. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll have to work on that. So now you're doing pre-orders for this book. So why don't you let us know where we can find you? Where can we pre-order the latest installment, Love miniseries?
So everything pretty much is all conveniently centralized at www.rainbowroompublishing. I really didn't plan that. www.rainbowroompublishing.com. There you can see any number of book trailer videos. You can see samples of the writing. You can see the reviews. You can see the interviews, video blogs, things of that nature. But when you first get to the homepage, the very first thing you're going to see is now for pre-sale. Love changes. And so you'll be able to go ahead there and pre-order your copy of that. And then there are also a million links to go to the various places where all of the books are sold, either in hardcover, paperback, or ebook. So www.rainbowroompublishing.com.
All right. Sound now I need to tell my audience, like, we're trying to put some different stuff out here, so I need you guys to support Eddie S. Pierce Jr. Go and
Yep,
support his
yep.
book. Go and pre-order, go share it, tell your friends, and yeah, let's get the ball rolling on some different types of stories out there. So I'm going to leave that link in the video below. Eddie, thank you so much for joining me for the interview. I think we had a great conversation, and I really wish you the best with this release.
Thank you so much, Rod. I really appreciate it and the whole opportunity. It's been great. It's been fun. And can't wait to do it again. I had to put out another book real quick so that we can do it again.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, everyone, you have a good night. Thank you for watching.